the COVID-19 pandemic is set to redefine and broaden the contours of infrastructure creation. And while it has disrupted the pace of work, there is a broad consensus on the need to keep investing and to build projects that are perhaps long in terms of gestation period in the short term, but are sustainable over the long term. The world needs to ramp up and focus on new segments like electric vehicles, but likewise, the government must respond via financial incentives and political clarity for that vision to materialize. So next we bring you a panel discussion on this very topic. Our speakers include Cedric Naike, member of the governing board, Siemens AG; Janardhanan Ramanujalu, Vice President, Regional Head, Saudi Arabia Basic; Renato De Castro, Smart City Expert; and to moderate the conversation, Sudhir Singh, Editor, ET Energy World.
A very good afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome on our platform today. I am Sudhir, and this is a panel discussion on infrastructure and what should be the face of infrastructure in the post-COVID world. We have with us a very eminent set of panelists, including Cedric Naike. He's there from Siemens AG. We have Renato De Castro. He's a very well-renowned infrastructure expert and smart city expert globally. We have Janardhan Ramanujalu from SABIC. Cedric, let me begin this discussion by asking you, and I can't help start this discussion and by talking about the funding or the financing side of things. That's a major challenge that infrastructure projects generally face. So, for example, the governor of the central bank in India, yesterday he gave a speech, and that speech is on the front page of all the major financial dailies today, where he's talking about how banks are not going to be, we should not look at banks, large banks, as funding agencies for infrastructure projects going forward, because they're already saddled with so much of, stressed assets are there. There are NPAs they're dealing with. There have to be innovative ways of financing. So can we start that discussion on that note, where you can tell us what should be the top 2 or 3 key priority areas when we think about sitting today in the middle of this entire pandemic, when we today sit and think about the future of infrastructure for the world globally?
So you have to go a step back, and we need to look at the fundamental problem we have with infrastructure worldwide. Infrastructure worldwide actually is not very smart. It's not very capable to understand what happens. And if you want to build an industry 4.0, you need an infrastructure 4.0. Yeah. Now, the pandemic is going to accelerate this in parts of the world, right? There's billions and billions of funds which are made available in the US, in Europe, to basically develop this infrastructure and make it smart and sort of redevelop it. So there will be a lot of public money which actually flows to be able to create something which is going to be sort of market-beating infrastructure. Now, the question for India is without a smart infrastructure, India cannot build a smart industry. So there needs to be certain new ways of financing and investing in it. And it might be in the public-private partnership area where something like this happens. Because you see, if you're putting more of the money into the infrastructure and make it smart, you can actually utilize it and capitalize it in a much better way than you did before, because you can look at lifespans, you can look at sort of utilization capabilities. So my take is we have to invest worldwide in infrastructure, and it will happen. Parts of the world will have huge amount of money which they dedicate to this. The other parts of the world need to be very clever on how to find the money to be able to compete in this world where you need a smart infrastructure 4.0 to build sort of an industry 4.0 on top of it.
So, Cedric, when you say smart infrastructure, let me ask that very basic question. What exactly is smart infrastructure? What are the top, let's say, 3 attributes of smart infrastructure? If you can help us understand that, maybe with some examples from different industries, or let's say smart cities, for example.
I'll give you 3 examples. The first one is buildings. At the moment, you and me, everyone here, spends 90% of their lives in buildings, right? So you want to be safe, you want to be comfortable, but you also want to have the right footprint, carbon footprint and energy footprint. Somebody in Delhi uses 20 times less resources than somebody in New York, right? So that's good. Now the question is, if you wanted to raise the standard of living of a building, 40% of all energy worldwide and resources go into building, but nearly half of it is being wasted. So you need to make the building all sensing, so it switches only the lights on when you're going in. It only sort of turns on the HVAC when you, or the temperature when you need to be there. It starts to really sort of adapt to you and your needs. So that's one example of an infrastructure where you can save huge amount of energy which is being wasted at the moment. The second one is an energy grid. Germany, as an example, we used to have 1,000 power plants in 1990, and 4 mathematicians which calculated how much energy you needed to distribute. We now have 2 million power producers in Germany, solar mainly. So this is a very different network in which you need to optimize on how you use these energies. More than 1.5 billion euros of energy is being wasted because it's being produced green, but it's not being distributed to where you need to go. So what I mean by smart infrastructure is an infrastructure which knows you're there, saves the energy, distributes the energy efficiently, and makes sure that in all of those environments you're safe and you're comfortable. That's what I mean by smart infrastructure.
So that's a very valid point and a very important point you're raising there. But you know, the thing that I wanted to ask Renato on this note is, you know, Renato, when we talk about this smart infrastructure or the examples that Cedric gave, they very often center around energy, right? So, for example, there's this thing about, you know, buildings energy usage, or there's this thing about how should we build our power plants in smart ways so that they are able to better respond to the environmental needs, for example. But apart from energy, right, what are your thoughts on when you're building smart cities? What are the other attributes of it? And where do you see, you know, the large components of a smart city? Are we doing the right thing in building them? Where do we stand globally, you know, in terms of using the right technology and using the right financing options, for example? Are we doing the right thing?
What I see, I'm in Italy now, and what I see is still a big lack in the telecommunications. I mean, the connectivity infrastructure. We faced here the first lockdown in Europe for the pandemic. I am like 10 kilometers far from the epicenter, the ground zero in Italy. And the first thing that we started seeing was governments started to understand that the infrastructure was not enough to manage the whole situation. So during the pandemic, we are not allowed to go out on the streets. Cars were not allowed to be there. And we had some vehicles with preferences. And the preference one was for ambulances and also for connectivity vehicles, the cars or the trucks that belongs to the telecom companies. And so to keep the communications on were very important. So what I see now is that I still, at least here in Europe, I see that we're going to have a lot of public investments in infrastructure is the way to put somehow money into the market, to make the market still moving. But the discussions maybe are still a little bit more political than practical. So in Italy, for example, we had the collapse of the bridge 2 years ago. The Genoa bridge is just to be launched now, the new one. They finished, they are just doing the final tests. And it was really a huge investment, and quite, they are already talking here about the Genoa model without bureaucracy, very fast and very efficient. But again, I mean, they are discussing about renewing the whole infrastructure from the 70s. It's a need. We have a very outdated infrastructure, mainly here in Italy, but these will not bring us to solve the problems of the present and the future. So, but of course, it's much more political oriented and positive to talk about physical infrastructure that people can see, tangible, like roads and bridge, harder than, you know, underground infrastructure, fiber and connectivity. We have this big topic now about antennas and 5Gs, good or not good. So yeah, I think that we should focus now to use this moment of recovering to really bring us to the infrastructure that we need to build this future. And yeah, without smart infrastructure, we definitely cannot have smart cities. But I think the big word now will not be smartness anymore, but resilience. What can we do and where should we invest to bring resilience to the cities?
Okay, so resilience is a very important topic, no doubt about it. So to sum up, what Renato is basically saying, he's saying three things. He's basically saying most of the infrastructure is really, you know, it belongs to the old world. The debate is very political. It's done at a very political level. You know, Cedric also touched upon the point of old age infrastructure, but he's also emphasizing upon the point of having really good communication methods for modern infrastructure to build. Now, I want to ask you, JR, you have been listening to that entire conversation and smiling. So two things I want to ask from you. First of all, what are your initial thoughts on this entire debate, right? We have talked about, the issue of age. We have talked about the how do you look at this entire debate, whether it's more practical or more political or things like that. Cedric has already talked about the need to have smart infrastructure, and he went on to define it also. How do you look at this debate? And secondly, particularly from your own industry point of view, where does the chemicals industry stand, for example, in term when it comes to the environment side or let's say the sustainability side of things or decarbonization side of the agenda or the topic is concerned? Yeah.
Thank you, Sudhir. Thank you, Cedric, and thank you, Renato. So I want to take 2-3 steps behind because I've heard one of Renato's speech, development needs to be human-centric. I like that very much, Renato. So just to give you an example from India, typically the world is judging development by urbanization. And China has 16 cities over 10 million population and India has 3. What India got right in its thought process and planning process almost 5 years ago is to declare about 100 cities to be smart cities, out of which only 30 cities are 1 million and above. So we are even talking about cities which are almost 67 cities below 1 million population. And what does this do? Because super concentration in mega cities spawns urban poor who don't have roots in those cities. You cannot turn them really into a smart city infrastructure for those people because they are not even anchored there. The COVID experience showed us that reverse migration within a short span. So India's concept of these 100 smart cities redistributes the urbanization, gives the opportunity to build from new, takes industrialization where, like you could deep into the places where migrants need not have to move too far away and start building them. So what are the after effects of this? So we are not started spending that much on these smart cities, but if you take a very close look on what are the projects these smart cities in India are working. So we have taken about 100 cities as an example from India, from basically livable cities to turn them into nice cities. Yeah. So those projects are basically building lakes, rainwater harvesting, basic bridges. And so this is basically turning it into nice parks. For instance, like we never thought of spending money on parks 20 years ago in India. Now we start to spend that. Yeah. And what's the next phase? You will find only about 10-20% of the money is towards the digital infrastructure towards the cities. But I think that's an evolution. So we have to take those new cities, redesign them from the scratch, take them from basic necessities to nice cities to smart cities. I think this is a journey. So your question about how to fund it, I think infrastructure itself is a massive Indian elephant, yeah, and it needs to be fed a lot. So the returns are only in long term. So this has to be a government-driven approach because more or less for business infrastructure, business to spend on infrastructure, they need returns within 10 to 15 years, which probably highways would do, but not many other infrastructure. So coming back to the point of the smart cities of India, 23 cities are building metro stations, trains today, yeah, train connectivity in 23 cities. Out of them, 12 already have, but they're expanding another 10-20. So we have 81 airports. So the government has infused a concept of, like economic flying to these 81 airports, redistributing this super concentration of urbanization. So I believe the path India is taking on redistributing into 100 smart cities, deconcentrating these mega 3 cities in some ways, which has happened due to COVID, is going to be a great starting point for us. But I must admit, like conceptually, we are always very good. In execution, we are not that so good. So I'm sure that we will get there sooner than later. Yeah.
JR, that's a very, very popular debate in India. I've heard so many people make the same argument that, we have declared 100 smart cities, which is well and good, which is absolutely fine. But then if you look at the kind of work we are doing there, it's very, very basic, right? And so people go on to the extent of saying that, if you're building a road or parks, how is that smart city, right? That doesn't make a smart city. So until you start really investing time and effort and other resources in building that really modern, systems, it's going to be, it's a long road to that to that ambition.
Let me give you one example on,
Okay.
because we are talking about digital connection to the infrastructure base. Yeah, India is probably the only country which through the digital means deliver a subsidy of a single bag of urea deep inside the countryside with some biometric identification. And I've tested it, by the way. I bought one bag of urea far away from a big city with my biometric identification, and gets recorded and gets approved. So this is a direct benefit transfer, how India subsidizes those who are needy. So the infrastructure is there. India is capable of those IT wonders. But I think, that's a journey towards what we are dreaming of, but it's not the starting point itself, let's say in the Indian context. Yeah.
JR, you're describing it. India has all of the ingredients to do something really great, right? The ingredients. Now it needs to be put together. And I like the way I think that Renato and you were describing it. Let's not call it a smart city, but a human-centric city. So the idea is that you put the human at the center of the experience. And what you then do is you're taking all this technology, which India has proven that it can do, right? I mean, I think India is using 4 to 5 times more data bandwidth, mobile data bandwidth, than anywhere else in the world. I mean, this is pretty impressive, right? You might like the geo whatever sort of developments, but it put a lot of digital capabilities. Now, in order to have a human-centric city, however, you need to make it all sensing. You need to understand where there is air pollution. You need to understand where the people are. You need to have these data to be able to optimize. And I'll give you an example. The biggest problem we have with all these metros and train, during a pandemic, you don't want everybody to take a metro. You don't. You want to make sure that people are safely apart. When the pandemic is gone, you want everybody back to optimize sort of this traffic. So I think that there's 3 steps. The first, you need to put the human person at the center of this experience. Second, you need to make it all sensing so you understand what the human needs. And then you need to make it adaptable and resilient to be able to react to it. You need to make it an adaptable city, which means that there's air pollution, less cars, right? I mean, I don't know if you know, I'm in Berlin at the moment. Berlin used to be the 2nd biggest city in the beginning of the 19th century. You couldn't see the light, right? There was industrialization, you couldn't see the light. Well, if I go to Delhi today or Mumbai, similar experience now, right? I mean, you need to leapfrog that. If you go through what Europe has gone for, I don't know, 40 years of sort of people in the 50s died because of air pollution in London. So you need to have the sensors to understand what's going on, to be able to adapt and react. And this is, Sudhir, what you were saying. What do we understand by smart city? It's a human-centric city which has enough sensors to understand what's going on and is reacting in different times differently. Air pollution, less cars. Pandemic, less people. It knows what to do to be able to keep its population safe and healthy.
Yeah, and if I just can contribute to end this topic of human-centric, I think that we never had in the history such a good possibility to really bring citizens as a stakeholder as we have now. I mean, I think we could, everything on paper was already explained and very clear. And I mean, the cause and effect was quite obvious, but we never had the experience to prove these. So now we see how our cities are with less cars or so on, because we had the pandemic and we had the lockdown. So I think that the pandemic is just a catalyzer. The trends were already here, and it was slowly going through this direction. Smart city is a journey, and it's not us making our city smarter, it's the society going through a new way to react together. So I think that we have exactly this fantastic, perfect storm now to really bring citizens as a stakeholder and put citizens on the table on this discussion, because at the end of the day, we are all citizens, right? I mean, we are using different hats as a mayor or a businessman or a professor or whatever, but we are born citizens and we are going to die citizens, So I really think, I mean, this talk was very theoretical, I don't know, 6 months ago, and I've been talking a lot about this, but now I really see that people start understanding that it makes sense. And I think citizens got this power of making, I mean, we saw so many nice projects happening during the pandemic coming from the society. It was not government, people were not waiting for the response, because everybody was lost in a war. don't shout for help, because everybody's in the same situation. Do your part, you know. So I'm really very positive and optimistic about this. I think that we really achieved now a new step on this development.
Okay, I think there are too many important points, you know, I'm really tempted to take up. So let's begin with the point that Cedric made about, you know, the shift. So he said that, you know, how Berlin used to be a very modern and great city. Now when he goes to Mumbai, he's you know, he gets the same kind of experience there, which reminds me about this very popular debate also, which is happening you know, parallelly. People are saying that one of the things that COVID has done, and people have now started realizing, is that a lot of the infrastructure development has moved from west to let's say more emerging nations like Asian countries, right? Which is all, you know, it's a trend that you can't really ignore. So for example, JR said, you know, that China has taken the leap in terms of 5G technology, or let's say solar technology or whatever. But then it's also a problem, because, you know, like JR said, one of the things about infrastructure projects is, which you can't ignore, is that long-term ROI, right? It's like in funding an elephant. So in the long term, it's going to give you that ROI, but it's also capital intensive, right? So and in times of COVID, it's going to become very difficult to have that kind of large scale projects, you know, seeking funding for it, and, you know, keeping them afloat over a period of, let's say, 20-25 years. Which brings us to the main point of what should be the funding options, the innovative funding options. Can we look at a few examples from any one of you? Can you give me some examples of you know, projects which have gone through that cycle of innovative financing, right? Which would have happened and would have delivered results in any industry, in any infrastructure industry?
Well, I can start with a very nice example I saw maybe 4 years ago in Singapore, about solar energy production and distribution. They started the first open market for solar energy selling. The point is that a lot of Singaporeans wanted to go into clean energy and less footprint. And but they are very vertical. They don't have roofs. I mean, people live on apartment. They cannot have by them. They cannot produce by themselves. And there was a startup there sponsored by the government that started putting together people that had the rooftops with people that wanted to buy clean energy, and they were sponsoring all these through crowdfunding, all this process of installing privately the solar production, and then redistributing these through their networks, you know. And it was the first big example how we could really start building infrastructure without depending the government. The government was just releasing the authorizations to do this. I deeply believe, as Cedric said before, I deeply believe that one of the best instruments we have now is the PPPs, the public-private partnerships. You know, Brazil, for example, also all the renewing, the modernization of the public lighting is being done through the PPPs. It's a very big market for PPPs. Government's not putting so much money on it, but it's regulating well these markets.
So
the Indian, yeah, so please go on. Yeah.
Sorry, JR, I didn't want to interrupt you, but the main idea here is, look, you talked about China. China has been so successful, it basically manufactures for the world. All right, it is a manufacturing sort of wonder in terms of capability, and has invested a lot in infrastructure, very centralized. Now India is different. It's the biggest democracy in the world. It is super sort of active. You have lots of entrepreneurs, and I like what Renato says. Is you need to start small. I mean, we had a project in Brooklyn, for example, in Australia. We did blockchain trading of energy surplus. You would produce energy. I would give it for your refrigerator or for your HVAC. I would give it to the local Starbucks. I would get free coffee. You start building trading zones. So that's the first one. The second one in India, I mean, we have 23,000 employees, 4,000 of them IoT capable employees as Siemens. We've been there since 1867. So we've committed, we have 21 factories, and what we're saying is, look, we need to do small things, we need to do big things. A small thing we did is we went to a hotel chain and says, look, we're going to save you energy. We're going to put intelligent capabilities into your hotels. We're going to finance it. And through the savings which we have, we will be able to do this. So that's another capability. We're working with Tata, for example, to store energy. The problem you have is you have lots of sun, but you don't always use it. So we have one of the biggest battery producers. So we're taking batteries with Tata Power and store excess energy to be utilizing it when it's less used. So you were saying of innovative sort of ideas. This starts with trading energy. This starts with doing sort of energy contracting. This starts of partnership with technology firms like Siemens and Tata. This goes up to, there's big projects. I mean, an airport often needs to be built also in conjunction. But if you don't plan it, it will not happen. And you need to plan it. You need to enable it, because India has all the talent. As I said, it has all the ingredients to do something fantastically well. Now it needs to put it together, enable it, so that we can cook and make something really good out of it.
Yeah, you wanted to say something, or should I? Yeah,
yes.
okay.
I have a couple of points just to make. You know, like I was locked down in a city of 50 million people during the initial phases of COVID. And then, you know, you discover vulnerabilities which you have never dreamt of. It was less than 24 hours to this huge city. 6,500 tons of vegetable has to reach every single day. There was no cold chain, and so was every city in India. So here is a business case for an infrastructural opportunity that will be paid for by the wastages you will avoid. Yeah, and a big city's vulnerability will be taken care. Now, where does it get into this difficult tangle? Is almost all the infrastructure other than the digital infrastructure. Land is a main ingredient. I think the government of India in the last 7 years has been taking multiple steps towards reforming the land acquisition in India, so that it could be done faster, it could be done easier, it could be done for a common good cause. So I think we have been successful in many of those projects where in highways and drains we are able to acquire land. But the whole physical infrastructure in a situation like India, as land reforms progress in all developing countries, I think, you know, the physical infrastructure will fall in place. I think the digital infrastructure is a little bit easier because you are using airwaves, and so you could reach it faster. So, but we have to conquer this challenge. And talking about a smart city, the city cannot be fed after all of the digital infrastructure. The opportunities which come from risks, there are entrepreneurs who need to step in. This is not the government's job. You know, like setting up a cold chain is not the government's job. So entrepreneurs need to step in, because these are plenty of opportunities across the country. 30 to 40% of wastages can be saved. It will pay for all of those. We don't need a subsidy from the government. And government's help on acquisition of land for those kind of infrastructure will make it happen.
Yeah, something super important.
Yeah, please go on.
Yeah, our idea, and sorry, because I was just like, the whole idea of smart is avoid wastage. We should sort of keep this, and Jara, we should credit you for this. The avoidance of wastage in transport, wastage in energy, wastage in food. All of those things will actually enable us to actually finance things, because the problem is if you produce a lot of food and you can't give it to the cities, that's wastage. If you produce it, if you use it in the city, but you don't use it because it's actually getting bad, you waste it. These type of things is what we need to sort of go for and build business models around reducing wastage.
I think there is too much optimism, right? When it comes to what India has been doing, so for example, you know, both of you have talked about some really good things about India. So JR has talked about land reforms, and he's really impressed by it. Cedric also talked about the modern digital infrastructure India is creating. But my point is, you know, there is something very, very fundamental that we have to discuss here, which is that, you know, so let's take, for example, manufacturing, right? And manufacturing as an input for infrastructure creation. So it's also a fact, and that's one of the biggest criticism points that India faces, is that we have had phases where we have not really, we have not really progressed when it comes to manufacturing. For example, we missed the bus in solar manufacturing, for example, and that's just one example, right? Similarly, are we doing enough to create, Cedric talked about storage, as an important component of it. Are we doing enough to create the modern manufacturing infrastructure that is required for battery storage, for example, right? So these are things that we have to understand and talk about. But I think I will take Renato's view also on this in terms of how does he look at different geographies in terms of their level of progress in dealing with the basic ingredients of infrastructure when it comes to smart cities, for example.
Okay, well, I had the opportunity to be in India already twice for mentoring startups for the Make in India. It's a very nice event we have every year there. I was cooperating with the IIT on these, and I saw a lot of nice ideas and nice projects. But maybe I still
Too much
see a
praise for
little
India
bit.
on this panel, I think.
Yeah, but maybe
Yeah.
I still see a little bit.
It's good to see so many optimists, sitting in one panel. I mean, it's very heartening to see that. Yeah.
But I really mean it, but maybe still a little bit of lack of innovation policies at governmental level. What I'm doing here, I'm heading research here in Europe to understand to what extent we have the smart cities popping up in the villages, in the towns. We call it, and India calls very well, smart village. And we see now this movement here in Europe. And we believe that this movement is kind of a result of all the investments, all the policies in innovation Europe has been developing mainly for the last 10 years with the Horizon 2020 and all the financing lines of investments on innovation. So I think that, there are ways to speed up this process, but this process, as JR said, some of these are not deeply investments that should come from government. Government can do the big picture, and I think the big picture is investments on this culture of innovation. So I think that could be a solution, and then we start seeing all this movement from the private sector financing infrastructure and projects that will support this growth in the cities. At the end of the day, we should see the city as a big platform, and this platform should be a live ecosystem that doesn't need to, or doesn't have to depend just in one stakeholder. Should be multi-stakeholders.
Okay. I wanted to ask Cedric and maybe gain from his expertise in this area. So when we are talking about modern infrastructure, and energy is a very important part of it. So, the way things have developed in more mature geographies or the Western world, broadly speaking, topics like smart metering, for example, or smart grids. Yeah, these are areas where India as compared, or emerging nations are significantly behind as compared to what already has happened in the Western world. What are the key learnings that we have? What are the top 3 things that we have to keep in mind, right? So for example, smart metering is one such very important topic, and India is just embarking upon it, right? And a lot of that work has already happened in Europe. So what are the top 3 learnings that a country like India can have when it comes to smart metering or deploying smart grids as a solution for modern digital infrastructure?
I'll go from top to bottom. The first one is that renewables will win over the long term. Absolutely will, because you invest at them at the beginning, but their running costs are going to reduce, right? And we will produce e-fuels, we will produce hydrogen, but that's the first one. The second one, we will move away from centralized to decentralized energy systems. And we will move to not as systems. You need to understand that an electrical system in the past used to be central and you were a load on the system. Now these loads starts trading. So this goes from renewables win, the networks will be decentralized, and people will start trading energy instead of just receiving and being a load on the system. That changes how we have thought about electrical sort of networks over hundreds of years. So that's the first one. The second one is you have to understand that in Europe, I'll give you an example, only 1/3 of all energy is electricity. And only 1/3 of this electricity is actually renewables. So there's still a huge way of increasing renewables and electrifying. We need to electrify mobility. We need to electrify heating. We need to electrify cooling. So that's the second biggest thing. So what I believe in, you asked me, is we will see a much more decentralized energy system. We will see a much more electrical energy system, and it will be much more, if you want, digitalized, because I need to start trading. So these are things, if you're thinking what a government can do, is it can think about how does it enable such a system to work. And we're working, for example, with, and I'm just took Tata because it's an Indian example. I mean, we're working with Tata Power Delhi Distribution Limited to build such a distributed smart grid where you would now have meters sitting all around, and they can not only sort of see where is energy being wasted, they can later on being used to trade energy also. So I go back to what JR was saying, it's all about reducing waste. If you want to reduce waste, you need to bring energy closer to people, you need to allow people to produce their own energy and trade their own energy, and you need to enable this to be more and more electrified as possible.
That's a very, very important point. JR, I wanted to ask you something. You know, all these important trends that Cedric is talking about, for example, decentralization, right? The need to cut down waste, the need to have more of green energy as part of your overall system. Now, you essentially represent the petrochemicals industry, right? The chemicals industry, and you know, there's a view which is widely held that that's an industry of the future, right? In whichever form the modern you know, COVID world looks like, the post-COVID world looks like, it will have a bigger, a very, very big place for the chemicals industry, right? Now I want to ask you, all these trends that Cedric is talking about, do you see those things you know, catching up in your sector also? How are they shaping up there?
First of all, thank you for bringing the chemical industry into the picture. I have just a minute to talk about it. If we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 of them of United Nations, 2030, almost 10 of them can only be enabled by chemical industry. So we have a major role in helping the world achieve as an industry to start with. So that's the context of chemical industry. If many people are not aware that the innovations of the chemical industry is what is going to make those happen in a major enabling way. Then coming down to this industry 4.0, SABIC has the biggest asset in the chemical industry in the world. We are number one, $85 billion plus assets we have and we own. And industry 4.40 is a part of a massive digitalization program. SABIC is already up onto this platform and started running into this. We are one of the biggest digitalization program running to optimize, and as Cedric said it, which I'd like to hear back, to reduce our wastage, to increase the efficiency of these assets. So we are onto this journey with the biggest asset in the chemical industry, and I think we will be a benchmark when we reach some part of our goals sooner. So I think the industry 4.0 would also have to be viewed from an efficiency increase into the entire manufacturing to the consumer chain. This augurs well for, of course, from the carbon footprint of the manufacturing, but it also means that do we really need all those capacities in a linear way like we were thinking before? I want to bring in this particular aspect which Europe is leading in their philosophy and thinking is that the part of circular economy. So far, you know, like whatever has served us in the last 100 years was a linear economy, take, consume, and dispose. I think the concept of circular economy, of whatever resources we could circulate, is this something which will come in, cut a lot of wastages, yeah, keep the carbon footprint of the world much lower level, make it sustainable for the next few hundred years. We're not talking about next 5 to 10 years. I think we should thank Europe for leading that. And I think, you know, like we have a good carbon print for the rest of the world to adopt from Europe. And SABIC is again one of those people who have initiated actually some investments in this. For instance, we have a completely chemical recycling of plastic waste. This is our participation and investment. And this is now being used from brands. But on the other hand, the entire industry needs to come together. There is a platform called Alliance to End Plastic Waste. Globally, all industries put together, right from the big FMCG companies to the chemical companies, which is investing in innovation and R&D to make that sustainable, to help and enable the circular economy. So a lot of things are pieces in this. Yeah, I think, you know, like what I would like to say is ultimately it is the digital world which can bring it together. The physical world will keep it in different places. It's the digital world which will bring it together and make it more efficient. Yeah.
All of you are talking too much about your own companies, you know. So, anyway, yeah. So please go on. Yeah, Cedric, you were saying something.
No, it's an example. It's an example, but there are many others too. For instance, in digitalization, in Industry 4.0, you need to look at who are the big asset owners in the world and where are they. That would set the trend for this Industry 4.0. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but JR said something profoundly, again, important. Physical resources are finite. We tend at the moment, by June, July, the world has used all of the sort of regenerated resources and is eating on his reserves, if you want, for the rest of the time. So physical assets are finite. The only way we can work with these finite resources better is with digital assets, because digital is infinite, right? As you have more sensors, you can make those assets, those investments, independent on the industry, very efficient. And this is what we have to do, because we're going to be 10 billion people, and we have to, I said at the beginning, I used to live in New York. 20 times more resources are being used by somebody in New York than Delhi. I mean, this is sort of the might of things which we need to address. So yes, we're positive, but I mean, I'm a glass half full guy, because we have to, and we have to use digital. And the thing which I wanted to also say about JR was saying is, we actually have to build a digital twin in the manufacturing process. So we need to build a digital twin of a product. We will then test it electrically, and we will test it physically. We will build the production process, and we will continuously optimize the construction process, if you want, so it becomes better. We will build a digital twin of a city, and we will run this to be able to actually simulate what could happen to be able to do it. So that's what I mean by, when I think, JR, what you said is, we have those limited physical resources. We need to use now our digital capabilities to make the most out of those resources to reduce the waste. And the digital twin idea of a city, of a building, of a process plant, perhaps even of a human being. This is my brain in the background. This is a twin of where it is. These are the things which we need to do to actually be more efficient and not waste resources.
That's again a very, very important point, Cedric. Renato, I wanted to ask you something. You know, you use two words which are very, very important on any infrastructure debate, right? First is resilience, and the other one is PPP, right? You said that PPP is, so Europe, for example, has had some good experience with PPP, but globally and in India also, right? The entire debate surrounding PPP is not always very, very positive, right? There are examples which are given of PPP, large PPP projects, which may not have, delivered to the extent they were expected to. So that's one thing that I wanted to ask you. If not PPP, what exactly are the other options that we have, right? And secondly, the point about resilience, that's a very important point. Can you help us understand what basically that means, and how can we create infrastructure for tomorrow which is more resilient in terms of, it's from every point of view, right? From the point of view of raising it, from the point of view of what we are getting out of it. So on these 2 points, if you could help us, understand the basics.
Okay, so first about the PPPs. Well, we have developed a very let's say complex frame or legal frame for PPPs that has been used as benchmarking around the world. The main concept behind it, and not talking legally about it, but is that you put it together, private and public sector. And so maybe what I see for the future is that we need to rethink the way you're doing the PPPs to make it more sustainable in long terms. I have participated in a big tender in Abu Dhabi, in the Emirates, for the public lighting of Abu Dhabi. And one very interesting thing that we saw in the PPP rules there is that the consortium that was offering the solution should be able to offer an update of the solution every 5 years, following the trends of technology. This was crazy to think, because to bring economical sustainability on it was very complicated, because we don't know what is the next. I mean, we can guess, but we don't know exactly what will be the next big disruption in this field, from wireless transmission to whatever can happen, we don't know. But there, the government was already asking for these kind of commitments from the contractor, is that, well, you should keep updated the whole system. So this is some way, of course, there they can pay, and the contract was also saying this. I mean, we are as government, we don't say that we want you to grant this without get paid for this. We are going to pay you, but we don't want to fix a 20 years term that will not is not flexible to follow with technology. Technology changes very fast. So I think that this flexibility that we find, or we should find in the legal contracts, will be the next trend. And secondly, there are very, very nice projects in the Netherlands. They call it the 4 Ps, first people, public, private partnership. So they are now bringing also citizens inside this process. And it means that you should listen to, and the project should be human-centric, yes. But the second point and most important one is that maybe you could also bring citizens as sponsors in the project. Is not asking money for people because we already pay taxes, but giving citizens the opportunity to invest in projects that make sense to their lives, you know. So also in Dubai, there is a very nice, this was the first company that was allowed to offer multiple contracts in real estate investments for crowdfunding. So they have now a company there that offers crowdfunding to invest in real estate. And these really revamped the whole real estate possibilities there that was going a little bit down during the pandemics, you know. So I think that, yeah, bringing new tools, I mean, at least legal tools to allow different ways to finance projects can be a very good solution.
Yeah, so I see it's a very interesting debate, and the topics we are talking about, we can just go on and on. And particularly with a panel like this, which is so frank and so with that level of depth of understanding, we can go on and on, no doubt, and I would really love to, but then time is finite here. Let me try and close this discussion by asking all of you, all three of you, let's say giving all three of you an opportunity to give your closing comments, a short comment on which sums up your overall view on this topic, right? What should modern smart infrastructure look like in a post-COVID world? What would it look like? And let's begin with Cedric.
So I have 3 things. I like to say 3 things. I mean, the first one is there's a paradigm shift which has been accelerated through the pandemic. The whole thing Renato said early on is actually the focus on infrastructure and the focus on digitalized human-centric infrastructure is being accelerated through the pandemic because we see the importance it has. If you live in Delhi and you don't have access to fresh food, you need to do this. So that's point number 1. The second point is that, look, infrastructure is just a base. It's a base for us to have the living. We talked about Industry 4.0. Without Industry 4.0 cannot exist without infrastructure 4.0. So we need to invest in it. We need to invest in it as companies. We need to invest in it as citizens. We need to invest in it as governments. But we need to be, as also Renato said, we need to be creative on how we can actually make that happen. So that's my second point. And the third point, the only way we're going to make it happen is by making it all sensing, by digitalizing the infrastructure we have, building a digital twin. And JR said this is going to happen to the chemical industry, this is going to happen to buildings, this is going to happen to cities or even villages. But as we bring this together, we can actually reduce wastage, and that's what we need to do. So pandemic has accelerated it. It is the basis for sort of manufacturing a better living, if you want. And we can only do it by putting digital and sensing technology and really building a digital twin of everything we do.
Okay. JR, your turn.
So I would like to say that the overall infrastructure, anyway, the goals are set by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The pandemic has changed few things. You know, some learnings from the pandemic, for instance, digitalization will accelerate. Yeah, there will be a deconcentration, there will be a decentralization, be it in the power industry or even in human development. Cities development will have to now deconcentrate. So I think what would be needed is a little bit of fine tuning. For instance, even a building, for example, the elevator capacity in buildings are not enough with social distancing anywhere in the world. So how it would be redesigned in future is all those adjustments which will take place, but keeping the goal of all of them being sustainable and human-centric, which is my favorite word from Renato. I keep repeating it. Yeah.
Okay, so Renato, everybody is quoting you and your human-centric comment. So how would you respond to this entire debate? Yeah.
Okay, and I will finish also with the resilience that I didn't comment in the last answer. Well, I believe that there are 5 pillars to build smart cities. It was in the past, it is now, and it will be more and more about technology, but technology is just a driver. Human-centric, it's very important. And then the main objective of a smart city is quality of life. So we should focus in the quality of life in our cities. All of these can be really, really empowered with what we call new economies. So yeah, JR said about the circular economy, very important. We have creative economy, innovation, and so on. And the sharing economy is the way that society can bring also contribution for this process. And the last one, everything should bring us to resilience. And then when you ask what's the definition of resilience, well, 1 month ago I was in another event there in India, online in India, and they asked me what I think that it will change in the definition of a smart city with the pandemic, with the post-pandemic world. And I said, look, I always had, I'm quoting since 2016, a definition that is a romanticized definition of a smart city that makes sense to the citizens. That is, smart cities are places that everything seems to be conspiring to make your life better. And I think that this definition is really, really good because it doesn't change anything. And this is the definition of resilience. Even the citizens doesn't need to realize what technology we are applying in the back of a smart city, but they must understand that everything conspires to make their lives better. And it doesn't matter if you are in a pandemic or if you are in a good moment. So I think that this is the same sense of infrastructure. We should see infrastructure investment in a way that we can perceive it in our lives. That makes sense. We should bring all the new resources and technology and theories on it, but makes sense to everyone. Otherwise, it's just putting money in the wind. It makes no sense. So yeah, I think that this is my wrap up.
Thanks, Renato. Like I said, it's a very, very interesting debate, and we can go on and on. But let me try and close it by saying that we have touched upon a lot of really important topics, and a lot of really important key takeaways are there, at least for me. So we began by understanding what really smart infrastructure is, what does it really mean, and how we believe that the modern post-COVID world will build its basic infrastructure, which is smart, infrastructure which is also human-centric, like what Renato said, infrastructure which basically is also going to be to a very large extent driven by renewables, like Cedric said, and decentralized also. But then the most important point, I think, was about how there's a need to use digitalization and use of data to ensure that that resource equity is there, which Cedric pointed out. How a person sitting in New York uses let's say 20 times more energy than a person sitting in Delhi. That's a very important point, and that's a point not to be missed. So a lot of optimism there, a lot of positive vibes there. But then, of course, there are issues which have to be dealt with. We need to have innovation in our funding mechanisms. We've talked about PPP and its alternatives available. We have talked about how there's also a need to, at some level, look at the entire subject as slightly apolitical, right? To build a modern base for a modern world. So I think it was absolutely fantastic to have this nice discussion with all three of you. Thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us and taking your time to to throw light on some of these really, really important topics. I think that's all. Thanks. Thank you.
Do share your feedback on this session, and you can also share your views via social media using the hashtag #ETGlobalTownhall. See you on the other side.